We're about to really kick fantasy football drafts into high gear now that the NFL draft is actually over and we actually know where these top guys ended up going in fantasy football purposes. And I went ahead, since we're a little bit far out still, and just predicted what the first two rounds are going to be in 2025 fantasy football drafts. We're getting into that today. Just make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So getting into the first overall pick, I don't really think that there's going to be a ton of discussion about what the top two picks specifically are going to be. But I think as of right now, it's going to be Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Because when I think about what Ja'Marr Chase did last year, he was such an outlier when you actually look at what the other wide receivers in fantasy football did in 2024, is that he stood out so much more. Whereas when you look at the running backs, even though Saquon Barkley did have the best season in fantasy football, non-quarterback, Ja'Marr Chase, the difference between him and the wide receiver 2 was about 70 fantasy points in a full PPR format, a half PPR format. So I just think that when you think about that, and the difference between Saquon Barkley, who is my number 2 overall pick, is that Saquon Barkley was only 2 points ahead of the running back 2, which was Jahmyr Gibbs in a half PPR format. So I'm not taking away anything, obviously, from what Saquon Barkley did in 2024. It was excellent. But when you think about what makes a 101 pick, you kind of have to have a really, really dominant season to where nobody behind you is even close to being in your area. And I think Saquon just had more competition with Jahmyr Gibbs behind him. That's why I've got Saquon right now as the 102, with Ja'Marr Chase being the 101. And the 103, I've got Bijan Robinson. And I think that Bijan Robinson is going to be a really good draft pick at the 103. I think right now there's going to be a discussion of where's Justin Jefferson? Should he be the 103? Or maybe CeeDee Lamb? I think Bijan Robinson does end up being the 103. And really the main reason is because Atlanta is definitely making strides this offseason. As far as what it goes with Bijan Robinson in particular, he should be a really strong fantasy asset this year because of the fact that he scored 300 plus points in a half PPR format in 2024. And of course, one of the big things when it comes to drafting the following year is recency bias. So how did that player perform last year, right? Well, that's why Bijan Robinson is going to be a top 3, top 5 pick at the minimum. And I think he'll be a top 3 pick because Bijan, what he did last year, averaging almost 5 yards per carry, doing so well on the ground, and in the passing game as well, becoming more involved throughout the year, I think Bijan is the rightful 103. And the 104, I think CeeDee Lamb is going to end up overtaking Justin Jefferson as we get closer. Because if you've looked at drafts and you've got into drafts on Underdog, for example, CeeDee Lamb has been behind Justin Jefferson most drafts on Underdog, and on Sleeper, he's valued lower in their ADP system right now for 2025. I think that the closer that we get to the actual start of the season, people will start to turn that around because Justin Jefferson does have a disadvantage this year because of the quarterback change once again. Second year, third year straight now, changing quarterbacks. You had Kirk Cousins in 2023, then you had Sam Darnold in 2024, who he did really well with, and then now you've got another change with J.J. McCarthy, possibly Aaron Rodgers. Who knows what he's doing? But the bottom line is that I think with so much instability, especially if it's J.J. McCarthy, Justin Jefferson won't be this pick. I think CeeDee Lamb, everybody will remember, him and Dak are actually really good together. With Dak Prescott, he's an elite fantasy option. And even without Dak last year, he'd had a really good season. But with Dak, they didn't do much at wide receiver over the offseason. I think CeeDee Lamb will end up being the comfortable 104 for many teams. The 105, I think it's also a very comfy pick as well. Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think that what I've early seen this offseason from people when they're discussing Jahmyr Gibbs in draft circles is that Jahmyr Gibbs, there's going to be an issue when it comes to Detroit Lions players this year. Because since they got rid of Ben Johnson over the offseason, didn't get rid of him, he just ended up being a head coach to the Chicago Bears. Well, obviously, he was a huge part of the reason why that offense was able to run so effectively. In my personal opinion, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be one of the 2 or 3 players that really is an excellent fantasy asset for Detroit this year. I think it's very hard for any offensive coordinator to get that much out of every single asset that they had, like Ben Johnson was able to do. And I think that Jahmyr Gibbs has just been so dominant for them. David Montgomery getting older. He's been banged up quite a bit. I think there will be more of an emphasis with Jahmyr Gibbs on the ground this year for this team. And I do think he'll end up being the focal point of this offense. So I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a very solid 105 pick that people will end up really, really being happy with. The 106, I do have Justin Jefferson here. As I just said, with Justin Jefferson, it's not that I don't like the player. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is one of the top players in the NFL and in fantasy football on a pretty regular basis. It has nothing to do with JJ as a player. The bottom line is, though, you get another quarterback this year who, by the way, was a run-first quarterback at Michigan. All we have to go off of with JJ McCarthy in the NFL is like one preseason game where, yes, he looked good, but preseason, anybody can look good in the preseason. So I'm just not super sold on JJ McCarthy being this excellent player who's going to throw 30, 35 plus times a game like Sam Darnold actually did have the ability to do. And Justin Jefferson obviously is going to be the main target in every situation. That will absolutely give him great fantasy upside, worth a top 6 pick in drafts. But as far as him being the wide receiver 2 off the board or being a top 5 selection, I just don't see that level of upside this year. And I think the more closely we get to the actual start of the NFL season, more people will come around to that as well. And I've got a wide receiver run starting here. Puka Nacua at the 107 here. You know, Puka Nacua is in a great spot because Matt Stafford is back. And obviously, we did not see a drop-off in Matt Stafford's play last year. They actually almost beat the Eagles to go to the NFC Championship. Puka Nacua is an absolute, he's their alpha in that offense, not just the wide receiver room in the offense. So what did they do this offseason? They get rid of Cooper Kupp, and they end up bringing in Davante Adams, who I actually believe will enhance Puka Nacua. Because what you can't do anymore, what you could do at the end of 2024 will start to double and triple Puka Nacua a little bit more because Cooper Kupp was just not as explosive and as fast and as crisp with his routes that he used to be. Davante Adams is still that guy. So I think that this takes away the defense's ability to be able to double, triple cover Puka Nacua, and he's a really high upside player in 2025. And I think people see that, and I think people appreciate what he did in 2024 when he was able to play. So I think Puka Nacua is a good 107 pick. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think familiarity starts to kick in with this 108 pick, and I don't think that people are really going to be comfortable letting Amon-Ra St. Brown slide further than this in the first round. Because I think when you kind of get to these next couple picks, there's a bunch of new guys here. And sometimes that's a good thing that people end up really appreciating. But again, remember, this is not the way I would do these picks. This is what I believe others will do in their drafts this year. And I think there's a familiarity aspect to Amon-Ra St. Brown that a bunch of guys below him in this same tier don't really have. But what we do know with Amon-Ra St. Brown is when the guy is on, he can absolutely be a stable 15, 20, 25 point performer on a pretty much weekly basis for you. And again, I personally believe he's in store for a good season along with Jahmyr Gibbs, along with Sam Laporta, because those are the big 3 in that Lions offense. And I don't think that their next coordinator will be able to capitalize on every single weapon. I think he is one of the big 3 that will be able to capitalize with him. That's why I like him at the 108. The 109, Malik Nabers. I like Malik Nabers a lot. And again, this is not what I would do. I believe that people will end up really liking him in this range, but I don't think they're going to like him much sooner than this. Because again, there's a familiarity aspect when you're going into fantasy football drafts that most people will not acknowledge publicly, but everybody internally when they're on the clock is thinking, well, I don't want to screw this pickup. And I know that Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know that Puka Nacua, I know that Justin Jefferson can produce like this. And I don't trust Malik Nabers as much, right? I think that will be a lot of people's mentalities because Malik Nabers is still going into a very uncertain year, right? Russell Wilson will likely start out this season as this quarterback, but midway through the year, it could easily be either Jameis Winston or Jackson Dart, who they ended up trading to get in the first round. back to the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft, I believe that Malik Neighbors is going to be a really good player in fantasy football this year. I think he'll make it work with whatever quarterback. But again, it's that uncertainty and that stretch that he had in 2024 after the concussion where he wasn't as dominant that will creep into people's minds closer to the draft. And that's why it would be a 109 pick rather than a top 6 pick. The 110 right here, we've actually got some interesting names here. I think Brock Bowers and the absolute uniqueness of the tight end position will start to hit people. I think Brock Bowers is a first round pick. I do end up thinking that people are just going to look at this guy and what he did as a rookie. Obviously, it was unbelievable. And nobody's questioning whether he can repeat this. Like Geno Smith is already an automatic upgrade at the quarterback position for Brock Bowers. And what Brock Bowers was able to do on 153 targets was ridiculous. He was their number 1 receiver, and he will be that again because, yes, they drafted a couple wide receivers second, third round of this draft, but they weren't any guys that are immediately going to come in and challenge Brock Bowers for number 1 duties. Jacoby Myers will still be involved, but Brock Bowers, make no mistake about it, is still the absolute bread and butter of this passing game. And I think that just with the assuredness that people will have with Brock Bowers this year, I think he creeps up into Travis Kelce territory. And people start to value this guy like that because everybody knows if you can get this level of a tight end in your fantasy draft, it sets you apart. I think he's a top 10 pick this year. The 111, I've got Ashton Jeanty. I do believe that this is a key moment in what I believe will happen. I do not believe Ashton Jeanty is worth the 111 in fantasy drafts. But I also believe people will largely think he is. The reason why is because Ashton Jeanty is obviously a top 10 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. Goes to the Raiders. They clearly needed a running back. There's no question that this guy is going to end up being the number 1 guy. But what I also think is going to happen is remember the Najee Harris season in Pittsburgh when he was a rookie. Very inefficient, but got tons of volume through the air and on the ground. So he ended up being a really good fantasy back that year. Top 3 back in full PPR leagues. I think that's what we're going to see with Ashton Jeanty. I think it's going to be a very similar season to that, but I don't believe that he's worth taking as the running back 4 off the board at the 111. I personally would want to wait a little longer, see if I get Amari and Hampton later on, who we may discuss. And I do think that Ashton Jeanty, just with the hype, everything that's attached to him in fantasy football, will end up being a first-round pick. Christian McCaffrey, I've got him rounding out the first round. I think Christian McCaffrey is absolutely a guy that, again, when we start to get closer to the season, right? We've already seen reports initially that Christian McCaffrey is fully healthy and he's got no limitations in voluntary team activities right now. Well, that's a great news thing, right? People are going to start to really eat that up the closer we get to drafts. And I think that that's going to go into effect because obviously when you think about Christian McCaffrey, knowing that he's the best fantasy player over the last decade, 5 years at the very least, people will start to want to take him higher. So right now, if you looked at Underdog, Christian McCaffrey before the NFL draft and they shut down their draft, they're now going to open this Best Ball Mania where I believe that he will still be a 3rd round pick, a 2nd round pick. I think as we get closer to the day, in August, late August, I believe that's when Christian McCaffrey starts to be viewed more as a 1st round pick. Because someone will want to take the shot on that upside. And I feel very similar about Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry obviously doesn't have the injury concerns that Christian McCaffrey has. But he is older. He's in his 30s now. So this is at any point could be the year that he just ends up falling off a cliff. In my opinion, the way I look at Derrick Henry is it reminds me of Mike Evans as a running back. I think at any moment now, you could be caught holding the bag with Derrick Henry. So I'm not really personally comfortable with taking him at the first pick in the 2nd round of a 12-team league. I'd rather let somebody else take him and try to get another running back later on who I think that you will have the ability to take. But I think people will start to feel really comfortable with Derrick Henry. Obviously, they haven't added anyone in Baltimore, so he's going to be the guy. But I do think that this is not a move I would personally make. At the 14th overall pick in the 2nd round, I believe Brian Thomas Jr. falls a little bit because of what happened in the 2025 NFL Draft. This is not to say that Brian Thomas Jr. is viewed unfavorably now. He absolutely is viewed very favorably. And I think that most people would agree he probably will end up being the number 1 wide receiver in Jacksonville. But now that they did take Travis Hunter at the 102, traded up to get him, traded a future first to get him, there's got to be doubt that goes into people's heads. There's doubt in my head on this one. Because I think that when I was watching Travis and evaluating him as a prospect, I believe that he was going to be a better defensive back. But he's obviously a great wide receiver. I'll tell you this, you don't go to the 102 from the 105 to take a defensive back. You just don't do that. That does not happen in the NFL. So I think that they're going to absolutely play him quite a bit as a receiver, and that will eat into Brian Thomas Jr. So I think that with Brian Thomas Jr., his stock tanked a little bit. Not tank. He did not tank. His stock fell a little bit in fantasy football over this draft weekend, and I think people will start to be worried the more closer we get to the NFL season and they start to see the hype that is coming with Brian Thomas Jr. and with Travis Hunter. I think people get worried about that with Brian Thomas Jr. And then at the 15th overall pick, I think people start to really hate this pick, but as you know, in every fantasy draft every year, you end up hating one of your picks at the beginning. A.J. Brown. I think people are going to cave and end up being comfortable with taking A.J. Brown. The comfortability aspect in fantasy drafts, especially for new people, want to take names that they know in fantasy football. This is a name that you should absolutely let happen if he goes in the first several picks of the second round. A.J. Brown, it will not be worth this price. But I believe that this ends up being what happens because A.J. Brown is a comfortable name that most people know. Everybody knows that he is an elite player and is absolutely capable of having 30-point games. There's no question the dominance that he can bring to your team. But I don't believe that it's going to be like that moving forward. This is a run-first team with Saquon Barkley. There's no question about it. But I do end up believing that there's going to be newbies in your league who end up taking A.J. Brown this high, and that's who you should leave A.J. Brown for. I don't think he's worth it. At the 16th overall pick, I think that we get back to a running back here, and we go with Devon Achane. I think Devon Achane being at this range of the draft is actually a very good pick. This is a pick I would personally make quite a bit. The only concern I have with Devon Achane this year is how bad I actually think the Miami Dolphins will be in 2025. I think they're going to be a really, really bad team. And I think that when you factor in how bad this team could be, if Tua goes down, we saw what the impact was for Devon Achane last year. He was not nearly the same level of upside player that he was with Tua. So if Tua is healthy, this is a great pick. But I think that with Devon Achane's nature here, this is a boom or bust guy to take, but it's a guy that, in my opinion, is worth taking the shot on because the boom potential is very high. The 17th and 18th picks, these are guys that I think you could interchange them. I think people end up going with Nico Collins over Drake London, but it could easily be the other way around. But those are my 17th and 18th picks. Nico Collins being in this Houston offense with CJ Stroud, the chemistry that he's built, it's not going to be challenged by Jaden Higgins, who they drafted in the second round. It will not be challenged by any receiver, even Christian Kirk. I don't care. Nico Collins is 100% this guy in this offense. And I think people understand that because when you actually look at what he was doing before he got injured, that hamstring injury really affected quite a bit moving forward for him. But even when he came back, he was still clearly their number one guy. Nico Collins' upside, though, is absolutely a 20 fantasy point per game type of player. And I think people will recognize that you haven't seen with Drake London. Drake London, you just have not seen that yet. And I think that overall, when you kind of think about that, Drake London is not going to be as comfortable this year with guys that were going at him in the early second last year. Even at the back of the first last year, he was able to fulfill that pick last year. But I think, again, when you think about the quarterback uncertainty that's going to be there with Drake London this year, it will scare people off. I do believe that. So I think that has to be taken into effect. He drops a little bit from his ADP last year, and I actually end up thinking he'll be a pretty good pick at this range. Then we've got another run at running backs here. 19, I've got Josh Jacobs off the board, getting closer to the second round. Now, again, if you looked at Underdog and if you looked at Sleeper right now, Josh Jacobs is not valued here. This is incorrect, number one. This is a great pick to get Josh Jacobs. And if he ends up being later in the draft, Josh Jacobs is the guy you want. But Josh Jacobs, I do believe, is a fantastic pick that people will eventually come on to. I think it just, with this hype coming into the NFL draft, all these new running backs that are here, There was tons of hype around them, and I think that as we get closer, it's going to be a Christian McCaffrey thing. It's going to be a Brock Bowers thing where people realize Josh Jacobs was so good last year that I can't afford to have Josh Jacobs being a third, fourth round pick that I end up missing out on. Josh Jacobs is a very solid pick at the 19th overall, and I think that Jonathan Taylor is also a very solid pick at the 20th spot as well. Again, the strong end to 2024 will definitely be a factor when it comes to drafters in 2025. His strong end leaves a really good taste in people's mouths, won a lot of people their leagues because he capitalized at the right time. And I think that that is just absolutely a factor when you're drafting the next year. Those guys that ended the year really well, their ADPs usually are rising in fantasy football in the following draft. So from 2024 to 2025, Jonathan Taylor is going to be a top, a second round draft pick because he's still young. He's still got a decent offensive line. There's not really a bunch of change in Indianapolis. They're going to continue to roll with Anthony Richardson or maybe go with Daniel Jones. I don't care what they do. Jonathan Taylor will be a very good player in fantasy again. The 21st pick, I believe, after everything is said and done, Amarian Hampton will be the 21st overall pick. And remember when I put Ashton Genty there at the 11th overall and I said I would not do this. I would personally want to wait to get Amarian Hampton later. This is exactly what I'm talking about. If we were just considering rookie drafts, I seriously now believe there's an argument that I would consider taking Amarian Hampton with the 101 in that rookie draft. Amarian Hampton's landing spot is awesome. The Los Angeles Chargers already have a top 3 offensive line in the NFL. That's number one. Number two, they have a run-first culture with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. They want to run down your throat. The thing that's going to throw people and why Amarian Hampton is going to be a very good value in drafts is because Najee Harris is there. On his contract, they gave him like $6 million, really a couple another million in incentives and in bonuses if he can hit. Amarian Hampton was drafted in the first round for a reason. This guy is their future at the running back position. In my opinion, is a really solid number 2 in this class. Easily would have been the number 1 running back overall if Ashton Genty was not there. He easily would have been. I think people will start to come around to Amarian Hampton being a first-round pick, but I'm telling you this right now, Amarian Hampton is a fantastic value in drafts right now, and as soon as Underdog opens it up for the Best Ball Mania, this is the time to go get Amarian Hampton. Amarian Hampton is going to be a great pick, and early on in Best Ball drafts, he will be even better value than this. So if you want to get in on drafting Amarian Hampton before his price rises, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. They will match that first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. It's where I won $19,000 playing fantasy last year. All you got to do is just go in there, deposit your money. They'll match it 50%. You get in on one of these drafts, go grab Amarian Hampton, give yourself a chance at winning the big money. Now, basically starting to round out this draft, this is another pick that I think people are going to make out of familiarity that will end up being a true landmine to avoid. Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is going to be a late second-round pick. I ultimately believe that it is probably the worst second-round pick that you could take in 2025 drafts. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more research that I'm going to do specifically to Tyreek Hill over the next month or two. You will start to see a lot more research-based videos on my channel. But right now, what I can tell you is that if you go back to a video I did a year ago about wide receivers who hit the cliff in their age category in fantasy football, Tyreek Hill is not only at that age, but he already fell out of the top 12. And historically, what we have seen from these wide receivers who fall at this age out of the top 12 is they do not return. Tyreek Hill will not return, and this pick will not bring back value. Avoid this pick like the plague, but I believe that there's going to be people who will make this pick thinking it's great value. Josh Allen, I think, is the first quarterback off the board. It could be Lamar Jackson just based on how strong Lamar played last year. It just seems like every year, Josh Allen is probably most people's preferred quarterback as the quarterback one. And I think regardless, whichever one it is, there's going to be a quarterback taken at the back of the second round just because of how elite the quarterbacks were last year. Particularly, Lamar Jackson was super elite. But I think Josh Allen just ultimately makes people feel a little bit more comfortable because there's less of an injury history there with Josh Allen than there is with Lamar Jackson. But this could easily be Lamar Jackson. I'm not going to stick my head in the sand on this one too much. And then I think at the 24th pick, rounding out the second round, Bucky Irving is getting so much respect right now in underdog drafts, in sleeper drafts. He's getting tons of respect, which I think he deserved. But I also think it sucks because I actually really like Bucky Irving, but I don't know if I love this price. I don't know yet. I'm not saying I don't. I'm not saying I do. I think it could easily be a really good pick, but I kind of think we're drafting him potentially at his ceiling here because Tampa Bay does have tons of weapons. They're definitely going to be a pass-friendly team, which he could benefit from. But if Rachaad White is still there taking away volume, that is going to limit his ceiling just a little bit. So I do think that Bucky Irving is a good pick, and I do think he will be worth a top 3-round pick, but I'm still uncertain. I do think people will end up picking him here, but I'm uncertain how I feel about Bucky here. So let me know how you think the first 2 rounds of the draft are going to go, and I will see you on the next video.